Welcome back to 14s by Teens. Today we are joined by Dr. Ann Hotchkiss, and we're going to talk about quite a bit of stuff actually, but we're going to talk about anxiety and kind of how it affects the brain during this time. So can you talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was in private practice in a couple of different locations out in Los Angeles and then in Dover, New Hampshire. And within the last few years, I have moved over into the counseling center at the University of New Hampshire. And there I'm one of the senior level psychologists who provide services to students and also help we have an internship trainee program for doctoral candidates in the field of psychology.
Okay. So obviously what's on everybody's mind right now is stress, just because, these are uncertain times and we don't really know what to think of them. And we don't know when we're going to kind of return to normalcy. So can you talk to us a little bit about how stress impacts the brain from, I guess, like a psychological point of view?
Sure. So I'm going to go way back to Hans Selye, who was one of the first researchers and theorists about stress. And he identified a sort of sweet spot for stress, that human beings as organisms function best with neither too much nor too little stress. That either too much stress or too little stress causes disruption in the hormones. So sometimes this sweet spot is also called the Goldilocks effect. Not too much, not too little. And our brains can naturally make adjustments to keep us in the sweet spot. However, when stress becomes prolonged or there are repeated stresses like close in succession or on top of one another, then the brain's equilibrium system gets overburdened. So what happens then? Our thinking narrows. We aren't as good at complex problem solving. Creativity tends to go down. Sometimes we lose social interest, or we might become more judgmental toward other people, more irritable with other people, more reactive when things don't go our way or when we're feeling threatened. All of that tends to pull for what many folks are familiar with, the fight or flight response, stress response. And that doesn't work really well with thinking creatively and working through complex cognitive issues. So uncertainty about the future that we're dealing with right now, and this being a time of transition for many young adults, for teens, you're getting to the end of semesters, maybe there's graduation, maybe there's search for work. All of that on top of the pandemic makes it difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks, another aspect of that stress that can affect us is being back with family, where roles may be a little bit unclear. Mm-hmm. There might be loss of freedom, loss of social connections, and those loss of social connections can also be something that affects the brain. We have a natural, we're social beings, so we have a natural tendency for the brain to go into more calming effects when we are around others. So our peers in the teenage and young adult stage are kind of like a chosen family, a family of choice. Mm. So we miss that when we're not able to connect. I want to do a particular shout out to all marginalized young adults and teens. They carry an extra burden of stress. Young people dealing with poverty, for instance, have very real fears of hunger and housing and other issues. International students may be stuck on a campus. They can't go home, or else they wouldn't be able to return and complete their studies. Some, if they are Asian, are facing discrimination and bias right now. Folks who identify as LGBTQIA plus are separated from their peers that identify similarly. They may not be out to their family members. They may be having to shelter from the pandemic in relatively unsafe spaces, either physically or emotionally. Transgendered students who are used to receiving hormone therapy may not be able to continue with that while they're at their home locations. A pretty stunning statistic I ran across was, which is run by the Trevor Project, which does outreach particularly for LGBTQ teens and young adults, is that crisis calls to their hotline have more than doubled since the start of the pandemic. So again, just an extra bit of compassion toward those folks.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things have changed, and for so many things just aren't getting addressed. Like you said, I didn't even think about the LGBTQ community, and that's definitely something that's really important. So kind of piggybacking onto that stress factor, how do we stay productive while trying to avoid as much stress as possible? Because it's really hard.
Right, it sure is. And you know, there's a lot about that sort of trying to get productive that tends to want to push us out of our sweet spot, that sweet spot I was talking about. But fortunately, there's a lot we can do with choices of activities, choices of attitudes, and of behaviors to kind of help us get into the sweet spot. So pressure for productivity. How do we do that while also mitigating stress? There's pressure for productivity to perhaps study or to find work, and that's very real. I just want to say that this is maybe not the time to develop a new hobby or, you know, learn how to speak Swedish. It's just, in the words of one, a trauma psychologist who recently weighed in, this worldwide deadly pandemic that's changed everything might be a skosh distracting and it's draining. So our energy reserves aren't what they might otherwise be. So our skills at stress managing, at accepting difficult situations and soothing difficult emotions may be more important right now than the degree of productivity we might like. So we need some self-compassion, we need kindness toward others. And so with all that said, on the other hand, a complete lack of structure can drag us down. That can lead to depression. So the key is to kind of try to achieve some balance. Create some structure, some routine in your day. Have a few anchor points, things you want to do, accomplish. Focus on what you do have control over. That's a great antidote to dealing with and trying to accept what we don't have control over. For sure, intersperse periods of productivity with breaks for relaxation, exercise, and if possible, getting adequate sleep and healthy food. So.
You know, you made a really good point. I feel like there's a narrative out there that, I mean, I know that we've talked about this in previous interviews, but trying to stay productive and doing things to, like, I guess, like, enhance yourself during this time. I mean, we all have extra time on our hands, so like, let's learn an instrument, or let's try to learn a language, or like let's, do all these things and try to better ourselves because we have nothing better to do. But you kind of have to find that happy medium where that's not just another outlet for stress. You need to be able to manage the responsibilities you still have as a student, or, some people are still working. So they don't have the luxury of being able to stay home. And I mean, some people can work from home, which is good, but other people don't have that luxury. So being able to manage that stress without adding more stuff, to your plate, it's always a good thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the second part to that question is, what motivational strategies would you suggest for countering avoidance? Because obviously, we still have our responsibilities as a student. You still need to get homework done, still have a test to study for. And I mean, this is finals for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
For
how do we
sure.
kind of counter that?
Right. So this is kind of a pivotal time, isn't it? And there are other things. There may be duties to family, if there are younger children. If you're the healthiest person in the household, you may be tagged with the grocery runs. So anyway, so what to do about motivation and dealing with avoidance. First of all, I think, negative thoughts and negative feelings are probably contributing to avoidance and procrastination for most of us. And so if we can cultivate the attitude of challenging our assumptions, that can be very helpful. This means kind of trying to liberate ourselves from negative feelings by stepping back from them and kind of choosing a different way to interpret them, asking yourself, is there a different way I can look at this? So that obstacle then gets moved out of the way of doing whatever it is in front of you that you want to do. In general, with motivation, I think you want to start with your priorities and your values. What are your long-term goals? And is there a gap between your values or your goals and your current behavior? If so, you're like most people in at least one area of our lives, right? So consider why it's important to you to make a particular change or to work on a particular thing. If you're trying to generate, say, motivation to look for summer work, write down all the reasons you can think of, minor or major, to make the change you're trying to make. And I recommend keeping this list available on your phone, in your wallet, on your mirror, whatever works for you. And then break it down. Break the task down. Once you've selected a long-term goal, the path from there might seem overwhelming. So I'd say the key solution is to break that goal down into smaller steps. And then each of those steps, when accumulated, will move you toward the long-term goal. So how small do the steps have to be? Small enough that when you consider the next step, that it might feel like a little challenge, but isn't overwhelming. Okay, what I need to do is call this phone number that I have. All right, can I make that call? I don't have to make myself think about anything that comes after that yet. I'm just going to make that call. And then I really encourage using both short-term and long-term rewards. Use small rewards, such as taking a 15-minute brisk walk in the sun, or watching a short YouTube bit. Sometimes, if you're having trouble struggling with what to reward yourself with, just ask yourself, what would I rather be doing? And sometimes the answer can be peculiar. I remember My kitchen was always cleanest right around grad school finals time. Why? Because washing the dishes seemed way more appealing than studying. So I used that as a reward. I'm like, okay, if you do a half hour more studying, then you can go do the dishes. It sounds weird, but then at the end of it all, you not only got some studying done, but you have a clean kitchen.
Happy.
So sometimes you might need a reward just to get yourself to sit down to a task.
Mm.
Arrange everything you need for that task, and then maybe you go grab a can of Coke and you don't start in on that first sip until you've actually sat down to the task.
Yeah.
Use longer term rewards for achieving multiple steps. Maybe your goal is, okay, I'm going to work out at least 4 times this week. Well, it's great to have some short-term rewards for each time you go work out. Maybe you say to yourself, that one t-shirt I really want to order. I'll let myself order that as soon as I've gone to the gym 4 times. Or, well, we don't get to go to the gym right now, but other kinds of working out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would also, I guess, to sort of finally wrap up on motivation, take time to savor the small victories along the way, rather than just marching right on to the next step. You know, sometimes we'll get done with something and then it's like we're right away thrashing ourselves. We got to get to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
So, savor the victories.
It
Brag about it to family and friends.
Exactly. It must take a good amount of, like, I guess, self-discipline to structure yourself that much as well. Because I feel like that's, I mean, you mentioned earlier that a lack of structure and a lack of things to do can stress you out even more, ironically. So it must be kind of difficult to enforce that that structure on yourself and that, like, kind of reward system. Because, I mean, what's stopping someone from just saying, you know, I'll do 5 minutes of work and reward myself for an hour.
An hour, yeah.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up. Like, you know, it's sometimes easy for us to cheat on ourselves, so to speak. Are you a person of your word? If you are, then you might use the pledge technique. And the pledge technique is that you find somebody, a friend, a family member, and you send them a text and you go, okay, the next 40 minutes, I'm going to be out pulling the weeds. It's my family chore. I've got to do it. And it's not up to the other person to police you. There's no shaming and blaming here. But it may be easier to follow through with it if you've told somebody else that you're going to do it. My own personal one that I routinely do is I'll text my husband and go, all right, I know there are cookies downstairs. I'm going to have 2, and that's all. Or
so he can hold you to it.
Yeah.
He sees more missing.
I'd encourage people listening to not go to their mothers or their parents in general, because I know that personally, if I told my mom that she would be on my case until I got it done. So maybe go to someone like my buddy Bryce, or you know.
That's
honestly,
Aiden, that's a really good point. Choose carefully.
Yeah, it's definitely important. You have to know who you are and who you're going to be able to listen to. I think for me, it'd be better to go to Bryce than my mom.
There you go.
So in a couple of our other segments, we kind of talked about mindfulness, and I think mindfulness is really hard. It's really hard in general. I mean, before this time, I never really thought about mindfulness, but I think now is an important time to look at it. Can you talk a little bit about mindfulness and maybe give us some techniques to help use it?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. I think mindfulness is actually a sort of slippery notion. I think it's hard for us in American culture to wrap our heads sometimes around this notion. It's the notion of being being present and attentive in the here and now, without worrying so much about the future, without focusing so much on the past, and trying to be in the moment. There are techniques that have been developed to achieve this result, and they are proving through research to be very effective for achieving relaxation, for people achieving an ability to self-reflect and get perspective on problems that might otherwise feel overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So I think especially during times of pandemic, it can help us mindfulness techniques can help us deal with uncertainty, to kind of push against that tunnel vision, and as I said, put things in perspective. So one mindfulness technique that I love is the 5 senses technique. And that is to challenge yourself to look for 5 things that you see, just notice them. 4 things that you hear, 3 things that you can touch, and 2 things that you can smell, and maybe 1 thing that you can taste. That's a really nice one if you're trying to get your thoughts into the here and now and you're out walking, let's say. Mm-hmm. It's a good way to get your mind off of some kind of mind train that's leading you in a stress direction. So it gets you sort of radically into the moment and into your immediate surroundings. It gives you that break from worry. Let's see, social connecting. We have to practice physical, but not social distancing, physical distancing. Social connection, however, helps us stay mindful. It helps us get unstuck from our negative thoughts. Have you ever been by yourself sometime and all you can focus on is a particular sort of negative thought? You get with a friend and pretty soon, it almost doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're talking about, you gain some perspective on those other issues. Yeah. Something else that's helpful for perspective taking, has some mindfulness components of it, is ask yourself, do you know anyone who's dealt with a period of adversity? How did they get through it? Do you have any living relatives who went through the Great Depression, for instance, or somebody in the family or a friend who's dealt with trauma and come out the other side of it? How did they get through it? Really interesting. That's helpful for building resilience. Other ways to be mindful is to connect with nature. And if somebody's in a city location, even connecting with nature can even be spending 5 minutes meditating on the details of a potted plant, mm-hmm. or looking out an open window.
Yeah.
There's a quality of mindfulness that involves cultivating a couple of different attitudes towards self and other. One is cultivating gratitude, an exercise that's been found really helpful with both anxiety and depression is to come to the end of your day and just name 3 gratitudes about the day. Doing something to help other people. That gets us out of ourselves a little bit. That's another technique that's useful. And then I think I mentioned too, just taking care of our bodies through exercise, through healthy eating, through some sort of compassionate self-talk of accepting our bodies as they are. We're surrounded in social media with all kinds of pressures to look different, to for something to be different about our bodies, instead of honoring each of our unique selves as we are. So cultivating some self-acceptance around our bodies is another technique.
Yeah, no, that's a cool one. I think you said a lot of great things. I think something cool that you said was the distinction between physical distancing and social distancing. I think in all of our interviews we haven't really. I think we've just used social distancing
Yep.
synonymously as physical distancing, and clearly it's not. You're definitely right. Like, it's important that we notice the distinction between the two.
Right. Isolation is definitely something that's not helpful for stress.
Yeah.
For sure. If there's a final sort of mindfulness technique that I would recommend, it's for everyone to acquire some kind of breathing relaxation skill. There are a number of them out there, and they're easily found online. And I think the easiest ones to learn are ones that just involve focusing on the breath going in and out. And you always have your breath with you. So if you're trying to get off of a particular mind train, being able to just refocus onto your breath, understanding that none of us can sustain focus on our breath. Well, there are probably some meditators who are highly skilled and can do that, but most of us experience what meditators call monkey brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're focusing on our breath, and we're taking some nice, good, deep belly breaths. And then we notice our mind drifting over onto a worry, or drifting over onto an anger, or what have you.
Mm.
And what we need to do is not get frustrated with ourselves, but just acknowledge, oh, there's monkey brain, and gently refocus back onto the breathing.
Mm.
We'd all probably be a little more together, a little more grounded, a little more fun to be with if we were all able to do about 5 minutes a day of that.
And I mean, I've heard from some people that it's like analogous to exercising. Like, the more you do it, or like playing a sport, like the more you do it, the better you get at it. So,
Right.
I mean, 5 minutes a day can make a huge difference weeks and weeks down the road when you're able to do it more easily and you don't feel your mind wandering as much.
Yeah.
That's right. It's one of those things, along with some other relaxation techniques, they accrue benefit with more practice. So a month out, 2 months out, you get more out of it than you did initially.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so that's kind of that was kind of our final question. I wanted to thank you because this was a lot of fun for us, and I hope that it was fun for you as well.
Absolutely. It's great. I think you guys, it's terrific to find you motivated to do this, to use the motivation word, through all of everything else that I'm sure each of you individually is dealing with these days.
Yes. So thank you everyone for watching. We'll be having some new and upcoming segments in the next few weeks. So join us for them. Thank you and have a good day.